Can a ball python's tank be too big? And will a ball python eat in a big tank? Well, I found the biggest tank I have ever seen for ball pythons, and here's the story of what happened when ball pythons went into this 23-foot long tank. The tank is complete with branches, grasses, a pond in the middle, branches to climb, overhead lighting, heat lamps, UV, the full shebang. This is the most incredible ball python tank I've ever seen. But do they eat? As you may know, many ball python breeders will say that a ball python will go off food in an enclosure larger than a rack. We managed to catch the keeper on his way past, and I said to him, "How do they eat in this enclosure? I bet you get a lot of people asking about how they eat." And he told us that they actually get people emailing into the zoo telling them that they're abusing their animals and that it's cruel to put them in a big tank. And he informed us that he was about to feed them, so did we want to film it? I was like, absolutely yes. So he went around the back, began prepping to feed these snakes. There's 4 animals in this tank in total, one of which is in shed. So we predicted that maybe this one wouldn't eat, but we're very, very confident that the others would. At this time, there's also a lot of breeding behaviour as well. So a lot of courtship from the male, cuddling up to the female, just caressing with that tail as well and lining up, but not really getting into locking yet. But that cuddling is occurring. He told us that these ball pythons get a variety. They get gerbils, rats, mice, chicks, quail. He told us it was very important that these animals get variety in their diet. One by one, the ball pythons in this tank ate their food, apart from the one animal that was in shed. Absolutely predictable, the same thing would happen in a rack. When the keeper was done and came back out after feeding, I asked him if they have ever bred in this enclosure before, because we were seeing those breeding behaviours. And he said they bred last year and the year before. They had a big healthy clutch on one of the females, and that clutch was taken off, and the babies are housed in their education house. So these animals are not only eating, but breeding in this 23-foot massive tank, with no hides really in this enclosure. There's some plants and stuff that they can get under, but there's no real burrow systems or traditional sense of a hide. So these animals are always on display, yet they're eating and breeding in this big tank. My animal is also in a 7-foot tank, and she eats just fine. My friend, who owns a shop, sells babies into 4-foots and 5-foots regularly from the start.
We breed all of our ball pythons in 4-foot vivs, and we also sell the babies out in 4 and 5-foots.
So what is it between the European perspective, where we're getting babies to work and animals to eat in big and large elaborate enclosures, and the American perspective, where it seems that if they're in a big tank, they go off food?
What do you think it is about a baby ball python when put in a large environment with food options, weekly, water? Why do you think the species chooses to die when it has everything given it to it, and the only difference is the size of the cage?
Well, if you have an animal that has lived its life in a rack and experienced nothing but that darkness and no stimulation, and then suddenly it goes into a large environment with lights, different smells, movement behind the glass, that can be a lot for an animal and can cause them distress. But if it was an animal that was raised with complexity and has learning in its upbringing, it's much more adaptable and able to deal with different environments. It's the same way as when you get an abused dog case, where you get a dog that won't walk on grass because it doesn't know what grass is and it's terrified. But we all know that dogs regularly run around fields and love running around on grass. So it's a case of that brain development of that animal and the life they experienced before. So we have this culture in the US where it's they won't eat in a big enclosure because it was an animal that came from a rack, didn't eat, went back into a rack, and then it was the rack was the best thing for it, and this cycle continues. So yes, your ball python will eat in a big enclosure if you take gradual steps up to that, if that animal's experienced nothing but minimalistic racking in its previous life. Or previously in its life, shall I say. Take little steps, adding complexity, allow the animal to learn, relax, calm down, get that brain firing again, and work our way up to that complexity. But these animals in these big environments will eat. It's not a case of how big the environment is, it's a case of how secure the environment is. Lots of hides and clutter and things to get behind and visual barriers make the difference in making an animal feel secure. Now, you can also have animals that are so resilient and used to being looked at constantly, like the ones in the zoo, that they don't care. But most animals would like to have that security along the gradient of their enclosure. Big enclosure, complex enclosure, lots of hides, works. Big vapid space, like you're doing a water bowl, a newspaper in a 4 foot and the animal's just sat there exposed, that can be what causes problems. It's not the space it's the problem, it's the keeper's ability to use that space. So if you watch the guides on this channel, we teach people how to set up these big enclosures properly to allow the animal to have the best life it possibly can, and to set that animal up for success as well. If the ball pythons in the biggest tank in the world, that's quite sparse and open to look at, are eating and breeding, why is it some animals are succeeding and some are not? Because it can't be a case of ball pythons do this or not, because that's not happening. Or does the answer lie in how they're raised and who's raising them? Check out the guides on this channel, and I'll see you in the next video.